Life as Ceremony shares personal stories, interviews with inspirational souls, and practical wisdom to help you reconnect with yourself and spirituality. Welcome back to another episode of Life as Ceremony. Today we have Ariana Fotinakis joining us. She is a mixed heritage woman with ancestors from Aamjiwnaang First Nation and Greece. Ariana is an entrepreneur, a mother, a decolonial facilitator, and breathworker. Thanks for joining us today, Ariana.
Thanks for having me, Sam. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. And thanks for bearing with me with my stumbles over the word ancestors today. I don't know what's going on, but we're rolling with it.
They're here. They're playing some jokes.
I think
Not,
that's what's
not
going
too
on.
serious.
I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that.
Hmm.
Okay, so are you ready for a few this or that questions?
I am.
Okay. Cozy night in or spontaneous adventure?
Definitely a cozy night in.
Yeah. Yeah. Sweet or savory foods?
See, that's a hard one. I feel like I get both. It depends on the situation, but I feel like I've always just had like the sweet cravings, the salty cravings, like the really delicious, like rich foods. I love all food.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, this isn't actually a question on my list, but what is your favorite food from your garden?
Ooh, I think I think I have to say tomatoes because I plant an exorbitant number of tomato plants and I need to justify it. So I'm going to say tomatoes.
Tomatoes.
Yeah.
Done. Love it. Okay. Dogs or cats?
Dogs.
Dogs. And ooh, how many animals do you have living with you?
I have 18 chickens and one dog and a
Eight,
3-year-old who is
eight,
feral sometimes.
18 chickens, one dog, and a 3-year-old who is feral.
Yeah.
Love it. Eagles or wolves?
I think eagles.
Mhm. Always having to sing instead of talk, or always having to dance instead of walk?
Ooh, always having to dance instead of walk for my own benefit and for everyone else's.
Amazing. What is the best book you've ever read, or best book you've read in the last year, if there's one that just feels top of mind?
Oh gosh. I just read Venko, and I can't remember. I think it's the author is Cherie Diamond or Diamond. She's a Métis author, and it's so good. It's like Indigenous, witch, like F the patriarchy kind of stuff, like all mixed in together. So good. I highly recommend it.
All your favorite things.
All my favorite things.
Love it. Do you have a favorite quote or words to live by?
Hmm, that's a tough one. Um, There's nothing that comes to the top of my head, but I regularly turn to Richard Wagamese's Embers. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. And I love to just like open it up and read a passage. And it feels like it's always the medicine that my spirit needs at whatever time I open it. And I bring his words into the end of my breathwork circles a lot. So, yeah, I would say some of the passages from his book are what stands out the most.
Absolutely. And it's such a great book where you can really just flip to any page,
Hmm.
and usually land on something that speaks to you that day or in that moment too, I always find. Yeah. Okay. Um, can you share with us a little bit about your background, your ancestry, and yeah, in regards to your reconnection journey as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll give the Cliff's Notes version of this. But as you said, my ancestors on my mother's side come from the Aamjiwnaang First Nation, and that's located in so-called Ontario, like right at the border with Michigan. And then on my father's side, my family comes from Methoni in Greece. So my dad was born here, but my grandparents immigrated, I think, like right before my dad was born. Um, and my mom was a 60s scoop survivor, so I didn't grow up in community. I didn't grow up connected to my Indigenous family. Like my mom was adopted when she was removed when she was an infant, and then she was adopted by who I consider my grandparents when she was maybe 2 or 3. And I always knew that I was First Nations. Like it wasn't one of those things where like we learn about it later on. Like it was something that we always knew. But because we had no connection with my mom's biological family, I didn't know much about where we came from. I didn't really know anything about my people. And we were really fortunate in that I don't have the full story, and a lot of it it's not my full story to share, but I know my mom's biological mom reached out to her at some point in the 80s. And so my mom, by some luck, had been found by her biological mother, and they didn't have a super close relationship. My mom, we didn't know that like 60 scoop was a thing. My mom thought she had just been put up for adoption. And there wasn't a lot of dialogue about what had actually happened. So we were fortunate enough in that we knew the community where my mom came from, and she had met her mother once, she met her brother once, but there was a lot of her own apprehension around really rebuilding the relationships there and reconnecting herself. So, as a young person, I always knew I was First Nations. I was really intrigued by it. One of my best friends was from one of the interior Salish nations, and her dad was chief. And I was always like, I always wanted to go with her to the res. Like, I just wanted to know what it was like what happens, what is a community like, and I never got the opportunity to go with her. And then, as you get a little bit older, I think like that curiosity kind of dies down. There's less of this like, who am I? Where do I come from? And you're just getting caught up in um I don't know, being a preteen and being a teenager. And I really struggled with addiction from the ages of 13 to 23. And shortly after I got sober, I was a personal trainer at the time, and one of my clients was from one of the North Coastal nations. She was in her mid 60s. She was such a badass. She was doing her doctoral research on Indigenous language revitalization. So I told her a little bit about my family story, and by this point we had done the work and we had status, so I like knew some of the concrete details, but I didn't know a lot. And she looked me like dead in the eye and she's like, there's something here for you, and you need to walk this path and you need to do the work of reconnecting. So I didn't really know what to do. I didn't know where to start. I started reading our like online magazine from Aamjiwnaang just to like see what's happening in the community. I started volunteering at Indigenous Peoples Day gatherings, at different organizations that supported Indigenous youth. Like I kind of started to immerse myself, but more from like a helper role. I didn't want to like go in and take up space because it didn't feel like it was my place to take up space. And I did that for a number of years. And I think it was in might have been end of 2018 or end of 2019. I was speaking with this auntie, and she was like such an auntie and spoke to you in the ways that only an auntie can. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, having a boohoo sob story of being like, I don't know, like I want to like be in ceremony and I want to do all these things and I want to like really be immersed, but I don't know anything about where I come from. And she just like cut me off and she's like, look, like no one is going to invite you in. If you want to make a seat at the table for yourself, you have to do that yourself. Like none of us, not none of us, but like the majority of us don't know where we came from and we have to do this work ourselves. So that was like another push. And I started attending sweats and really just like going through the uncomfortable elements of like taking up space that I wasn't sure I was supposed to take up. And through that process, met some really beautiful connections. I ended up meeting a cousin of mine on Facebook. And then so they came to Salt Spring and like brought one of my mom's cousins and they got to meet one another. So it's like, yeah, it's been a really long and winding journey of reconnecting to that side of my ancestry. And even on the Greek side, like I grew up with my yaya and my papu. I have many memories of sitting in the Greek Orthodox Church with them, but like also not really being connected. Like I just remember at such a young age acknowledging that like I had two really strong cultures in my lineage, but like not feeling like I had any culture. Um, and I've been feeling the call to really start to like reconnect with my Greek roots and more of the ways that they work with the land and the herbs and more of the spiritual side of it as opposed to like the Greek Orthodox side. um, that's kind of sitting in my periphery, and I know is something that I have to start doing soon.
Okay. Thank you so much for being so open and sharing your story with us and the winding journey that it was and is and continues to be. You know, I always say in our lifetime, we're always on this journey and we're never not reconnecting with something, even ourselves, throughout our lifetime. And you mentioned that at 23, it sounds like that was a pivotal moment for you. Um, can you share? Well, I don't want to ask you how old you are, but I'm curious for listeners, like sort of how long the journey has been for you since then. Because I think you're touching on something really important for listeners and for anyone who's reconnecting in any way, especially with their ancestry, that it's a really slow journey. It's not one that happens fast and it's slow for a reason. So yeah, can you share with us a bit more
Yeah,
about that?
totally. I'm happy to share my age. I'm 36. So I got sober when I was 23, and it was probably like 2 years after that when I was working with that client. I think I was with her in 2015, 2014, 2015. Um, and like even before that, again, there was these like seeds of reconnection. I think I was maybe in grade 10 or 11 when there was an amendment made to the Indian Act that made it so my mom and I could get our status, because prior to that amendment, if an Indigenous woman married a non Indigenous man, she was stripped of her status, and then none of her children could have their status. This is just one of the many ways in which the Indian Act um, um, really goes against Indigenous women's sovereignty. And so when that amendment was made, I pushed my mom. I was like, let's get our status. Like, let's put all like the pieces that we have together. And so again, I was maybe like grade 10 or grade 11 at that point. Um, and then that kind of like trailed off for a little bit. And then just after I graduated, I was volunteering with the Indigenous Ed department at one of the local high schools. I thought maybe I wanted to go down the road of like working with youth who were experiencing challenges, but I was also a youth experiencing challenges, and it just didn't, timing wasn't right. There was a lot that wasn't right. And so again, it kind of like trailed off. And when I got sober, like reconnection, not only to my lineage, but also just to myself and my body, was such a foundational thing, because I'd spent the last 10 years completely numbing and dissociating from all aspects of myself. And so first I had to learn, like, what does it feel like to be in this physical body? How can I like stay connected to this body when things get hard? And I think that really did set the foundation for being able to start to take on a lot of the deeper work of reconnecting with my roots, because you learn or have the potential to learn some really tough stuff. And there's grief and there's rage, and even now there's still a lot of grief. And I think had I tried to approach that from a place of being very disembodied, I think that that could have been a really, um, the word is kind of evading me right now, but it could have been a very disorienting experience for myself. And I think I probably also would have gone into it with maybe not the most solid of intentions. I think I probably would have gone into it with like a, what's in it for me? Like, I need the healing. I want this. And like less about like, how can we really start to re strengthen our family and make it so that my daughter doesn't have to grow up not knowing who she is and where she comes from. Um, and you know, colonialism, it teaches us urgency. It teaches us that, oh, I want this thing, so it has to happen now. It teaches us linearity. And part of decolonizing involves recognizing that everything has its own time and pace and place, and that sometimes we might actually never even get to where we want to get to. I don't think I will ever be fully embedded in my community, and that's something that I've had to grieve and understand. But um, there's also really strong and beautiful medicine that comes with that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you talk a lot about taking up space or that fear in taking up space along your journey. Where are you at with that now? And what guidance do you have to offer people, especially those who are maybe mixed race or reconnecting?
Yeah. I mean, it still comes up for sure. This concept of being Indigenous enough or not Indigenous enough. And, um, has colonialism impacted me as much as it has as someone else? Because I am relatively white passing. Like, um, there's all of that that comes into the periphery. And I think it comes back to that auntie's advice where like I was waiting for so long for a permission slip to be invited in. And it's like our people are carrying their own trauma and are navigating their own journeys of like involvement or lack of involvement in community and spaces and places. And like, who am I? Like, not so much who am I to think that I deserve to be in these places. Who am I to think that I have to wait for somebody else to invite me into this place? Now, of course, there are certain places where we do need an invitation, right? We can't just like walk into Sundance and be like, hey, I'm here. Um, but I think in general, like attending powwows or when there are sweats that are listed as being open to the community, like if you can find it, and it says that it's an open public gathering, then who are we not to do that? Because this is what colonialism wanted. Colonialism wanted to sever us from the land, from ourselves, from our families, from our roots, our medicine. And by buying into these narratives that I'm not Indigenous enough, or I wasn't harmed enough, or all of these things, we essentially let the goal of colonialism win. We let the colonizers win by not revitalizing, by not reclaiming. And I do think that there are respectful ways of doing this. I'm really grateful that I went into things from a helper standpoint for those first like 4 or 5 years. And it's something that I still do, especially where I live. I'm a guest on these lands. So I volunteer where I can, I lend a hand, I pay a percentage of my profits to one of the local nonprofits here as part of a land back initiative. Um, it still very much is like, how can I support and contribute and uplift? But I no longer buy into the notion that I am not Indigenous enough to be able to participate in what is like my culture.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe back then there was that thought of I'm not Indigenous enough, therefore I have to be invited. Whereas now it is with whether it's a powwow or a community posting where you can go without an invite, showing up and creating that space and no longer holding that narrative that I'm not Indigenous enough, of I'm absolutely Indigenous enough and it's okay for me to take up space here. And I also hear a lot of like balance in what you're saying as well. And I'm really appreciative for the clarity you shared as well, because there's something to be said for, creating space for ourselves. And also there are certain instances where we do need an invite. And so there is that balance, right? And yeah, and I think that I see that a lot of people of like, well, who am I not to be invited to something where maybe it's not okay, you
Mhm.
know? And people, especially for yeah, wanting to take part in cultural ceremonies or things that aren't their own culture. And that's okay. And I think we're gonna get into this later of like it really just stemming from people's curiosities of really deeply wanting to reconnect. But we have to do it respectfully. And I think how we do that is we slow down. And I think that's also why, thoughtful reconnection journeys are really slow, and that's okay. And so I do want anyone who's, on that kind of reconnection journey with their ancestry to really hear that and know that it's long and slow and can be challenging and helpful and healing and all the things. But I know for myself, when I was like 8 years ago, I thought it would be, yeah, like I didn't really understand how slow it was at the time of
Mhm.
just that consistency you're talking about of showing up or coming in through that lens of being a helper. I also hear so much in your day-to-day life now where you're really like living and embodying what you talk about, especially from the decolonial work and facilitation that you offer, just in how you give back profit or the acknowledgement that you're a guest on these lands. And it sounds like you have a lot of awareness and embodiment around that too. Can you share with listeners more about that yeah, how you live in, and what decolonization, I guess, means to you and how you live it every day?
Yeah. There's are you familiar with Elaine Alec?
No.
Okay, I am a huge fan of Elaine Alec and her
Okay.
work. And so I'm gonna share something in the way that she teaches it. And she just launched a new book. Highly recommend folks get their hands on it. It's so potent. Everything about her work is incredible. And one of the things that I love the most about the way Elaine approaches the conversation of colonization and decolonization is that she distills it down into really simple terms. And essentially, she says that anytime we are operating from a place of fear, control, separation, and sickness, we're operating from colonialism. Whereas when we operate from a place that's rooted in trust, in love, in connection, and in belonging, we are essentially operating from a place that is more decolonial in lens. Now, when my business partner and I, Vanessa, we run a company called Decolonize and Rize. And when we're working with organizations, they want to know more of like, what's the textbook definition of decolonization, which really is, it's about dismantling these colonial systems that we exist within, which really is everything from education to law to justice to healthcare. They're all very much rooted in a colonial lens, a lens that was brought from somewhere else and imposed on us. And so decolonization really is about the dismantling of those systems and either revitalizing Indigenous ways of knowing and being, or using a two-eyed seeing approach and blending, because we know people aren't, no one's going back, right? Like we're all here together. So how do we find a new way forward? But approaching, if we look at decolonization only from a systemic lens, it really doesn't cover the whole picture, because we as individuals, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, all of our rainbow relatives, we have all been colonized. Many of us operate from very colonial worldviews. This perspective of like I matter, my needs first, or like my little family unit first. Um, this notion of like hustle culture and how our productivity is, or our worth is measured by our productivity. Things that a lot of the times folks might have the language to attribute to capitalism, or the patriarchy. A lot of it, it's all so intertwined with colonialism. So we can start to decolonize our minds by allowing for a slower pace, by not feeling like we always have to be doing and rushing and producing. In my parenting, I'm constantly reflecting on, am I like, am I leading from a place of recognizing my daughter's autonomy and her brilliance and wanting to uplift that while creating healthy boundaries? Or am I trying to control from a place of fear, or because I think that I'm the authority and I know best? Because those are two very different perspectives. So we really do have the opportunity to decolonize everything in our lives. And I don't actually know if I will ever reach a point where I can say that I am fully decolonized. I don't think that I will. I don't think we will ever reach a point in society in my lifetime where we can say that we're decolonized, but we can be on an ongoing journey of decolonizing and consistently working to dismantle the stories and the narratives that we've inherited about who we are and how we're meant to show up in the world, and ultimately what our place and what our role is here. And it's something that I encourage everybody to do. Like, this is work that all of us are being called on board for.
Mhm. If someone were to say, I want to start decolonizing my life in some way today, what's the first thing I should do? What would you tell them?
Oh, that's a good question. I would invite curiosity, like for them to get curious about, why do I think the things that I think about certain things? Why do I do things in a certain way? And we can start to ask, like, whose belief is this? Like, is this something that genuinely belongs to me at my authentic core? Or is this something that was imposed on me by capitalism, by my family, by the shame that my ancestors carry, by colonialism? And once we can start to get curious, I use the process of decolonizing as like, I like to refer to it as untangling from colonization. And we can start to pull at the threads to start to see where we've been conditioned to operate and think in a certain way. And we can start to almost like depersonalize ourselves from that. We can start to um, maybe begin the process of no longer identifying with certain things. Like I used to really identify with like my productivity and I love getting shit done and I like really got a high off of it and I loved getting praise for it. And then I had to start to, after realizing what that was doing to my physical and mental well being, I had to start to look at like, okay, why do I get such a high off of this? Why do I think that this makes me so valuable? Where did I learn this from? And so that early process of curiosity can be quite confronting, but it can also teach us a lot about ourselves. And it might teach us that we actually maybe don't even know ourselves as well as we think that we do.
Yeah, what a great answer. I think that to apply curiosity to it, I think just brings people closer to their own truth and their own awakening rather than, even telling someone what to do, of just, well, get curious about, these things and see what you notice. Sorry, I need to take a drink of water.
Yeah, go for
I thought you were the one with raspy lungs after the boot camp on the assault bike, and now I have it.
it.
Okay. Hearing you speak, something that came to mind for me is how decolonization can actually really support people on their reconnection journeys as well. For those who are mixed race or reconnecting, because when I think of decolonization, or in ways in which I've decolonized my own life, and slowing down being one of them, or I guess two things I think of: one, slowing down for me, and then the other one was not enough. I also held the belief I'm not Indigenous enough. And then, through my own decolonization, I realized, oh, this idea of like, I'm not enough, which so many of us hold that core belief around, I'm not enough, is really just a belief that's been etched into us from colonization and capitalism. And, so yeah, I think it's actually really beautiful that decolonization can support us on our reconnection journeys as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And, if I can add something to that too, I think it's important to note that reconnection and decolonizing, it's not only for Indigenous folks either, right? Like, there really is not a place across the world that has not been impacted by colonization. Even if you go far enough back in Europe, like they were colonizing each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm willing to argue that every single person comes from a lineage that was at one point deeply connected with the land, lived in tune with the cycles, had their own form of magic and medicine and ways of healing naturally. And, we even see it with the witch burnings and how that was so demonized and how that was stripped away. And when we look at all of the violence and the fear and power and control that has happened through centuries all over the world, it's no wonder that we are existing in such divisive times where we're all so disconnected from land, from ourselves, from our families. And what's been really interesting to me as of late is that the more I talk about reconnecting with your ancestral roots for everybody. So I've
Mhm.
had non-Indigenous folks sliding into my DMs being like, I don't know where to start. I don't like my family didn't keep records. I don't feel German enough. I don't feel Dutch enough to reconnect. And it's like, on the one hand, there's a part of my brain that's like, we also don't have all of these things, right? Like so many Indigenous folks, like our names were changed. Like some Indian agent just came through and was like, here, your last name is Rogers now. So it's
Mhm.
like, we also don't have those record keepings. We also don't have a lot of that information to go on for a lot of us. Um, but on the other hand, it's so fascinating that there is still this notion of like not feeling like Filipino enough or Asian enough or all of the things because of folks having been disconnected from their own land, whether by choice or in search of safety or slavery or all of these things, right? So I think that it's important that we really broaden the lens because non-Indigenous folks, especially those of European background who feel like there's nothing in their lineage, like there's no good or there's no medicine, and it's just all, I don't know, things that I hear people saying. It's like there is medicine and there is really, really rich culture that is waiting to be reclaimed.
Mhm. Thank you so much for adding that to the conversation. I think it's so important. And I mean, I have an English last name, Squire, and I know that there's so much good medicine in every lineage. And as you were saying about, colonization, and if we go way, 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 way back, I always say if we go all the way back, we're all connected with the element of earth. Like, forget the names, the titles. Like, if we just really transcend that, where do our souls lie and where do we really all originate and connect from? And it's from this element. Yeah. And so, yeah, I hope folks listening to that, everyone's on their own reconnection journey of some kind if you choose to walk that path, I guess. Um, and I just kind of think that we're all walking it. When I talk about like the spiritual path, I actually don't think, I think we're all walking a spiritual path.
Mhm.
And just with reconnection or spirituality and ancestry, I'm also curious. I hear a lot of that as well of people like wanting to embody spirituality or embody culture, and those things can intersect, but they can also be different. What is your advice to someone who's trying to, who, yeah, maybe feels like they're not enough of something or their own culture, but they're trying to connect with culture or spirituality, and there's just this disconnection or disembodiment? How do you help them bridge that?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'll just go back to my own journey and how I started because that's really the only perspective that I can share from is I just learned what I could from where I could. And so I don't even remember like the things that I was looking at, if they were books or like social media and stuff. um, but I would not do this now, but at the time I would just like go to a metaphysical store and I would like buy a bundle of sage and I would like light some sage and I was like, oh, okay, like this is something that I know my people work with. And again, I would do it differently now, but like that was a step that I needed to take. And I really do believe that when we start taking steps and when we really do have the intention of reconnecting with our ancestors, of doing the healing work that comes with that, because again, it's not all rainbows and butterflies, like, yay, I'm reconnected. Like when we really are willing to show up for our ancestors and show up for those who are going to walk after us, I believe the ancestors are conspiring to lead us where we need to go.
Mhm.
But we have to be willing to look kind of dumb and to not have the answers and to take steps without knowing if they're quote unquote right or not. Again, this is part of decolonizing, is being willing to make mistakes. And here on Salt Spring, I have quite a few friends who are really connected with their Celtic lineages. And it's been really cool to learn about, I don't know if it's like the Celtic Wheel of the Year, but like the different ways that they honor the seasons and the different points in the seasons. And even if you don't necessarily know the ways that your community like specifically honored these shifts in seasons, you can probably find more of like a broad generic thing.
Mhm.
um, and in doing so, in starting to engage in the practices that are available to you, I also believe it starts to awaken something within us.
Mhm.
And there is of course a place for protocol and tradition, and I think there's a place too of just like learning how to be in the ceremony of life, like is exactly as your podcast is called, right? Like life as ceremony. So even though I don't think my ancestors grew food in the way that I do here, they likely had very intentional ways of working with the plants and the seeds and tending the soil. And I like to think that when I'm doing that today, even though it might look a little bit different than how it did for them or a lot different, that I'm still honoring them and I'm still carrying that wisdom in a different way.
Do you remember your first experience with sage? Or even how old were you at the time you went to the metaphysical shop and bought some?
Yeah. So the answer to both of those is very different. Like I remember being little and it wasn't very often, but I would wake up in the middle of the night and like I could smell my mom smudging from another room and um that had a lot of its kind of own memories intertwined with it. But I think for myself, I was probably like when I went into the metaphysical store, I was maybe like 20, 25, 26. Like
Mhm.
shortly after that client of mine was like, you have to start doing this. And I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to go buy a bundle of sage from the metaphysical store and wave it around my body.
Oh, thank you for sharing that story with us. And just even in all of your sharing, I feel such grace and such permission to make mistakes. Hearing you talk, I think of my younger self and I'm like, oh, this is totally what she needed to hear, right? Versus holding so much shame or like even secrecy. I'll tell you my sage story in a second. You'll appreciate it. But yeah, this is totally what I needed to hear, when I was younger. I think there's so much fear around right or wrong and versus following your truth or, doing the, like I always say, like you're walking in a good way when you're moving with integrity before your feet have left the ground. And if we can come back to intention and integrity and doing the best that we can, even with the metaphysical shop, like you were drawn to it and pulled to it for a reason. Like you were following the nudges and it might have not, yeah, like I still think your ancestors were speaking to you and guiding you as best they could in the current systems we have because we have metaphysical shops that sell this shit. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
what else? We're kind of like, what do you want me to do? And you're like, okay, like I'll walk down to the metaphysical shop, I guess. Like I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd love to hear your sage
My
story.
sage story. Okay. So I think I first when I first like remember the smell of sage, I was in a yoga class. I think I was 15 years old, and it was like a whole body memory or experience where it was one of those experiences where you like wonder if other people are having the same experience as you. Do you know what I mean? When you're like in a yoga meditation class, a ceremony, any kind of experience, and you're like, whoa, like whatever is happening for me right now, what is happening for every other person in this room because you can't see their inner experience. And so that's when I had this like really big nudge of something that I didn't know about or understand. And I also went to a metaphysical shop and recognized it and recognized the smell of it and bought some. And then I was 15. Like this is before any social media even existed. I was not doing this with my friends. I was by myself alone in my room, and my mom thought I was smoking weed. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So that is my sage story.
Different plant, mom.
Yeah, exactly. Different plant. There you go.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Back to decolonization. I'd love to hear more from you about how it guides your work today and how do you work with organizations and individuals?
Yeah, it's interesting when I reflect on my like entrepreneurial career, which I started a year after I got sober. So I've been doing this for like 12 years, I guess. I didn't have the language for it, but what I have been doing this whole time essentially is helping folks decolonize their minds. As a personal trainer, helping to dismantle the notion that our bodies need to look a certain way and that movement is really only a form of like dominating our bodies and exerting power over ourselves. When I was a business coach, I was very intentional about not supporting folks in a way that led them to lead their businesses in a way that was extractive, exploitative, that was like rooted in profit over all costs and all of these kinds of things. And So it's interesting now where I'm like, oh, okay, like I am actually working in the realm of decolonizing, but like I've actually been doing this whole time. And I think a lot of folks are, when we see folks working in like conscious entrepreneurship or like ethical marketing and sales and things, like it all has a very decolonial lens to it. But I would say the majority of my work right now is with my business partner, Vanessa, and we work with organizations on decolonizing. So it looks different depending on the organization. Sometimes folks bring us in because they have Indigenous employee resource groups and they want to offer like well-being circles, sharing circles, things like that for their Indigenous team members. It's an opportunity to connect, um, to like just be Indigenous in a space that they're maybe not always allowed to bring their full selves into. So that's part of the work we do, and that's part of the work that I really love. And then the other part is working more with non Indigenous folks and helping them identify what their role is, both as an individual and also as an organization in the reconciliation and decolonizing process. So we start to look at ways we can begin to decolonize the workplace, which benefits everybody. Our colonial ways of operating, especially in a corporate environment, really suck for everyone. So, how can we start to create workplaces that honor personal boundaries, that are not extractive, that recognize that we are whole beings and we're not just walking bodies and brains, and that we also have hearts and spirits too? So that's a lot of the work that we do, and we occasionally will run our workshops and circles for individuals as well. So people who are maybe small business owners, family members, community leaders who want to engage in the work but don't work for a company that's bringing us in.
Mhm. How will the world positively change through this work? You know, we're talking about decolonization, and I have my own answers or what I think is obvious as to why this work is so important, but I'd love to hear your answer and from you about, why should an organization do this work? Why should individuals do this work? How does it positively impact humanity?
Yeah, I mean, we just have to look at the state of the world right now. We have to look at the fact that the world is on fire. The mental health epidemic that we're experiencing, the burnout epidemic. In one of our workshops, and Vanessa pulled these stats together. I think it's 500,000 Canadians miss work each week due to anxiety, depression, and burnout. We look at industries like fast fashion and Amazon, where it's just like, let's just get the new things out as quick as we can. I think Shein or Shine, whatever it's called, I think they add 10,000 new items of clothing to their website every single day. And all of that ends up somewhere. We don't have this like invisible place where all of the stuff that we acquire because we're being told that we need it in order to feel worthy, to feel happy, to feel meaning in life, like that all goes somewhere. And that usually goes to places that's out of sight, out of mind, like on the coast of Africa, where all of the clothes that just get dumped end up. So I think it's really like it allows us to really zoom out and come away from this individualistic notion of like, my actions don't impact anybody else, because they very much do. And I don't want to go like super negative here, but I would say that a lot of the actions that we take do have very negative implications for the world around us, even if it's not right in front of our faces. The flip side of that is that our actions can also be incredibly positive. And a lot of people think, these problems are so big, like, what could I possibly do? And there is so much that we can do. I really do believe in the ripple effect, where if we take one positive action, that spreads out into the community and somebody else might be impacted by that. And it spreads out further and further and further. And I don't know if all of us making more conscious choices about what we consume and don't consume, or speak up and pressure organizations with how we do or don't spend our money. I don't know if all of us doing that is going to be effective, but I do know that none of us doing it because we think that it doesn't matter, that that is ineffective. So I just think about my daughter and her potential children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, and it's like, how can I not try to do something? Like, it really, it baffles me on the one hand that we feel that there are like no long-term implications. Like, how do we think that we can continue going on this way when we're already seeing such intense ramifications of the last 10, 20, 30 years? And at the same time, I also have a lot of compassion and empathy for people who just don't have the bandwidth to take that broader, more zoomed out look, because we're so exhausted from trying to exist within these oppressive systems. And it makes it really hard to not even be of service to something that's greater than yourself, but to even think about something that's greater than yourself. And it's really sad that a lot of folks are in that position. So I have compassion and empathy. And I also want to be like, okay, so what do we need to do to stop letting ourselves be oppressed by these systems so much so that we can push back? Because we have to. Like,
Mhm.
that's why we should, because we have to.
That's that's why we should, because we have to. And I think that's really, the work that you are doing in your business of going into these organizations to create that ripple effect of greater change for humanity and for the planet as well.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, I really appreciate, you touching on the planet and the fact that the world's on fire. And I think, we go about our days, la la la, and we're like, wait, oh, I need that reminder that my home is on fire. And what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
And how am I going to, and at the same time, and, the world is on fire and we absolutely need to do something about it. But the earth is going to survive. Survived every other mass extinction. It will survive ours too. That for me, like it's humanity. Like we need to reconnect with each other, with our
Mhm.
communities, with some of the values you shared at the beginning of that love, trust, honesty. Oh, you said something that I loved so much. I wish I was taking notes during these interviews. I'm gonna listen back. I'm gonna listen back and be like writing down what Ariana says. You said something that hit me in such a way, and it was, we are not just bodies and brains walking around. We also have a heart and a spirit too.
Mm.
And yeah, I love that so much. And I feel like for anyone who's working in an organization or who's feeling the weight of these oppressive systems who really treat them like a body and a brain, like that's to not see your heart and spirit, which needs to be seen and heard in order to be nurtured and nourished so that not only we individually can flourish, but everyone can. So I love that that is the work you're doing of going into these organizations of these aren't just, bodies and brains, that every one of us has a heart and a spirit too. And um, when we honor that, look what can happen for everyone. It's really like also the way you're talking and the work that you do, I look at it and I think win, 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 win. Like no one's losing here. Like why are
Mhm.
we not doing this?
I mean, maybe the billionaires will lose, and I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that. But like, people think that decolonizing, like, we do it for Indigenous people. And it's harder to get buy-in because again, we live in such an individualist society that like to take on this monumental amount of work that we think we're doing for a relatively small subset of people, I don't get, but I get why people aren't on board with it. But again, as I've said a few times now, like colonialism sucks for everyone. These systems are not generative. They are not built on the sustaining of life and creativity. You see all these memes and it's like somebody saw this and thought we needed to make Microsoft Teams, like this beautiful river. And it's like we had to, I don't know, sit in Zoom meetings all day. Like this, I believe, is not how, as human beings, that we're meant to live. And there is a better way. And I don't think that it requires us to like go completely off grid and like live off the land and all of the things. I think that there's a way of blending it, but just in a way that is softer and more spacious and more life-giving.
Yeah, and more sustainable.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Totally.
absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about a couple of your Instagram posts that really spoke to me or I have similar, view or opinion on. Um, yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to read it out to you.
Okay.
A significant amount of cultural appropriation stems from the fact that most folks are so disconnected from their roots that they're searching for anything that will give them a sense of purpose and meaning. Tell me more about that post that you shared. And yeah.
Yeah. So, I follow like a lot of like new age, like there's just kind of like what my social media it oscillates between like gardening stuff and like new age spirituality. And I've very much like been in that world too, right? Like I'm a breathwork facilitator. I live on Salt Spring. Like there's a lot of like ecstatic dance and cacao ceremonies and medicine ceremonies and like all of the things happening. And like I also like it to a point. Like there is a part of it where I'm like, I like sometimes the kind of like airy fairy sit in circle and connect with yourself and breathe and like all of these things. And I've really been sitting with like, okay, at what point like does this where do we start causing harm with these behaviors? Where are we no longer respecting the medicine that we're carrying without having the lineage, without understanding the protocols, without understanding the teachings? And I'm sure you're aware there's a really big push now to talk about cultural appropriation. And I'm seeing folks say things like, if you're not of the lineage, you shouldn't be working with it. And I don't know where I sit on that. Like there are folks who I know who aren't Indigenous who lead sweat lodges. And I feel some kind of way about that. And I also know that they were mentored by an Indigenous man who taught them and who was like, there's no one in my community who wants to carry these teachings. So I'm going to pass them on to the people who do. And so there's a lot of gray area here. And I personally don't necessarily believe in like a if you're not of the lineage you shouldn't be engaging in or teaching. Like there are some ways where I do think that and some where I'm not sure and some where I don't. But I do think that if we look at cultural appropriation, which can be defined as like a dominant culture taking practices from a marginalized culture and using them for like profit, um, I don't think the majority of people who engage in this have ill intentions. Some do, for sure, that absolutely exists. But I really do think that the majority of people are just like longing for that connection to something greater than themselves.
Mhm.
And as we talked about before, because so many of us have been disconnected from our cultural roots, we might not be able to see like our ancestral practices back here, but what's right in front of us is what's easily exploitable, which is usually things that come from like black and brown folks. And so we will take those and we'll extract them and it will exploit them, not with bad intentions, but it continues to suppress and marginalize the peoples whose these practices initially originate from. And this is something that I sit with often because I'm a breathwork facilitator, and breathwork obviously has roots in yogic traditions, but breathwork in like conscious connected breathwork, it's so far removed from its original like blueprint, and it has been heavily westernized and colonized. And so for me, there's still this dance of like, how do I work with this medicine that is rooted in yogic traditions, but is very far removed from it? Like, how do I work with it in a good way and like
Mhm.
still pay respects to where it comes from and who it comes from while recognizing that it's something that I really do feel called to carry. And it's something that I continue to grapple with and sit with. And I don't know if I'm doing it right or wrong, but that's also part of decolonizing is being willing to be receptive to feedback and to check your intentions.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, based on, yeah, I think that you are following your truth. And I think that you're going to sit with it and you're going to follow it while it's your truth until it's not your truth. And then it'll change. And that's okay.
Mm.
Our truth changes as well over time. Once upon a time, I taught yoga and I don't teach yoga anymore. And yeah, and when I was, walking that path, I was totally living my truth at that time. But then yeah, got older, my awareness changed, my beliefs shifted, how I felt shifted. And then, I kind of let that go. And for some reason, for me, yoga nidra, meditation, but really like journeying through meditation is what stuck around. And I'm also, given what I now know about my ancestors and my family, I'm not surprised that's the one that stuck around when it comes to journeying and between the worlds. And yeah, what you said about what's right in front of us, for me, especially on my reconnection journey, like I found yoga at 15. Like yoga was my ceremony until I had any sense of connection with my ancestors. And so we just, yeah, and I think of, me at that age and throughout my journey of just really wanting to reconnect, right? And there, I'm a perfect example of someone who was reaching for a lineage that was not their own because they were seeking for this connection, this longing that I didn't even understand or have language for at 15, really. But
Mm.
yeah, it just resonates with me a lot what you talk about how folks are reaching for something and where is that line? Like, where is that line that we cross? Because even when I think of spirituality, like for me, the essence of spirituality is connection. And the minute we're creating disconnection, we're not embodying spirituality. So how can we support people in coming back together and support them in in practices or, even when you and I talked earlier about, okay, if we all travel back in our ancestry and, come back to the element of earth, what does that mean for all of us in terms of, you know, I want to say like who owns what? And I'm like, nobody owns nature. Nobody, like, in terms of some of these, practices or lineages. I've also met lots of people who are deeply embodied in their truth, sharing practices or ceremonies that are not from their lineage. And what I feel when I'm in their presence is embodied truth. And so I don't care. Like in that moment, I am like, there is someone who is so embodied in the frequency of what they're teaching. I can feel it. And they've been, taught or mentored in a good way, or just sought out teachers who are not doing it in an exploitative way.
Mhm.
And that's like, who am I to determine what somebody else's truth is, you know? And so, yeah, even when you talk about on Salt Spring or the things happening and that you enjoy it to some extent, I'm like, totally. And like, I go to stuff like that as well. And I'm like, one of the drum circles I went to was led by a white woman, and it's one of the drum circles I've felt the most safe at. And she absolutely is a medicine woman following her truth. And I'd love to ask her more about her ancestry just out of curiosity. But I think that we can also just, it's not up to us to tell other people what their truth is. And it's kind of up to us to be in space and discern whether we feel that that person is embodied in what they're offering and if it's of resonance with us or it's not. But if all we're taking is like more like this resume of like who they are or where they're from or this or that, we actually don't know if they're embodied in what they're sharing or not. So similar to you, I'm like, sometimes there's certain things I'm totally okay with. A ton of stuff, no idea where I stand, and I continue to sit with it every day. And then other stuff where, yeah, where I might feel differently about it. So,
Yeah.
anyways, sorry, that was a long
No,
tangent.
no, it was beautifully said. And I think, like, again, to keep coming back to this theme, like, that's part of decolonizing as well, right? To say that you're doing something wrong and I have the answers and like you need to stop doing this because I think that, like, that is a colonial form of control.
Hmm.
And creating space for the gray area, for the nuance, for the layers, the complexity, and you said the word discernment. Like, I think that's such an important element to bring in because there's so much that we don't know and there's so much that we don't see. And I think to your point of like really being able to feel into like the frequency and the energy of the person that you're working with, um, is a very potent indicator of how connected they are to the lineage and the respect that they bring with the medicine.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was thinking of that woman who I've been in drum circle with of respect, and like you can feel it without, you can just feel it in that presence that I don't need justification for what I'm feeling or experiencing. And even the sense of like having to over justify is,
Mm.
again, a colonial mindset of like, I'm good enough to be here and I've done this, that, and the other, so this is why it's okay for me to blank. And, I think, we all have a truth detector and we all have the
Mhm.
ability to discern, and you'll know it in your own body. Yeah. Okay, a few final questions for you about ceremony, if that's okay. What does ceremony mean to you?
Mm. Ceremony, I think there's like words that come through as opposed to like a full definition. And it just feels like full presence and intentionality and letting yourself be moved or changed by something.
Beautiful.
Mm.
When I listen back, I'm gonna take notes with my little Ariana notes. And what does life as ceremony mean to you?
Yeah, recognizing that there that any moment of any day can ask for full presence and intention. Um, Before becoming a mom, I had this like really elaborate morning ritual where I would spend like 3 hours journaling and meditating and doing breath work and like all the things. And then I would like close that part of my day and go into like my day-to-day mode and like doing all the things that I had to do. And I remember just wanting to for it to be really natural to have that same level of presence that I had in my morning ritual at various points throughout my day. And with my daughter now, like being in the midst of a meltdown and being like fully attuned to her and like what she needs and noticing what's coming up in my own body and like learning how to respond to that at the same time and how to decompress after that, like that is ceremony to me. Like there's so much discomfort and growth. Taking 10 seconds to have a sip of my cacao while I'm on the deck and she's like eating her pancake and listening to a story first thing in the morning. Like that is ceremony. It can, I don't want to downplay the importance of the big ceremonies, but there are so many little moments throughout the day that can be ceremonial as well.
I I sit with that idea of like downplaying the big ceremonies, even with the name Life as Ceremony or some of the things I share. And what I remind myself of is that those little moments, it's about bringing the sacredness to those little moments. And if
Hmm.
we think of spirituality not being linear or hierarchical in any way, of viewing it as a circle of nothing is greater than, more than, better than, less than, it's actually really about amplifying the sacredness in the small things too. So I think that they're like just as valuable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I love
Yeah.
that.
Okay. How can listeners find you and support you?
Instagram is my favorite place to hang out. I'm pretty inconsistent with stuff, but if you like chickens and garden things, and then some decolonial tidbits sprinkled in there, finding me on Instagram at my name, Ariana Fotinakis, even though it's really uninstagrammable, would be the best place. And then if you want to connect with my company, Decolonize and Rize, we would be on LinkedIn. We also have a website, decolonizeandrize.com, but we share what I think is some pretty good content on LinkedIn. We're trying to make LinkedIn not such a boring, stuffy place. So, yeah, if you want to come hang out with us there, we are there as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sitting down to chat with me today, for all of your wisdom. And I feel so nourished having a
Mm.
conversation like this to start my day. So thank you so much for coming on Life is Ceremony.
Yeah, miigwech for having me.